Hi, welcome to another episode of Tim's Garage. Today I'm chasing a bubble in my cooling system. Despite getting it running the first time and getting all the air burped out really easily, for some reason I have a persistent bubble. So there's all kinds of methods that individuals have used to try and get that bubble out of the cooling system. Everything from undoing the coolant reservoir and raising it up fairly high to allow it to become the highest point in the engine system so that air can trickle out of it, to jacking the car up on the side, to using an airlift vacuum device, which I have, and I've tried to bleed all the air out of the system as best I can with that. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for a way to try and confirm that I've got all the air out of the system, and it's going to be a two-part purge. I'm going to gain access to the system and create a small 10 psi pressure on the system to see if I can push any air that might be left in the system out. And Mike Martin did it in one of the videos that he showed, which was a very good way to get the air bubble out. But it still left some questions to individuals about how to go about doing it. And I think I've got a pretty easy, simple solution with only one connection that you need to split. And be able to do this purge pretty easily. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to jack up the car just slightly on this side to make sure the car this is the highest point. So this is the highest point in the vehicle. And from there, I'm going to, there's two lines, and as you can see, there's one line that runs to the top of the head underneath this cover here, comes out the side that's adhered in this little clip, comes across, and I've got it pinched off with a rag and a pair of needle nose pliers. And I've done that to be able to prevent any any water or air from traveling through that. There's a second line, this line right here, which is currently open. I'm going to pinch it off when I get coolant moving through it, but this is currently open. And what I'm going to do is, because both of these lines come and tee into this one line that runs into the coolant reservoir, I've pulled this line off the coolant reservoir, I've run it into a little bottle, and we're going to test and see if I can pull this out, and I'm going to watch for any air that might come out of this. I'm going to use very low pressure to be able to do that. The other thing that I did is I clamped off the overflow line that is the breather line for the reservoir that comes right here. So I've clamped off this line and the line from the top of the head, and I've left the line that comes from the bleed at the top of the radiator. I've left that one open for now. So I'm going to go and try and put a little bit of air pressure in there. I've already got my air compressor filled up, and I've got the air regulated down to 10 psi. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in here, and let's watch and see if we get any air out of there. That looks pretty clean. Looks like there's no air bubbles coming out of that. Oh, no, there was a little bit of air coming out. But for the most part, that is pretty clean. Now that we've gone and purged that through, it's a pretty simple little process. We're just going to keep cycling this coolant back through. I'll just pour it right back into the coolant reservoir, which is where it came from. Top this back up again. And two things happen when you use a small water bottle like this. It's very difficult for you to pull too much coolant out because the water bottle will be full before you run out of coolant in the reservoir. So it's sort of a self-fixing system. I'm going to do it one more time just to make sure we've got no air coming out of that. Yeah, that looks very good. I don't see any air coming out of there at all. See, it's coming out pretty clean. Okay, so I'll go ahead. I'll dump this back in the coolant reservoir, and I'll clamp off this line right here. Actually, I'm going to put a little air pressure on there so I've got it coming out, and I'll clamp it off as I've got the water coming out. There we go. So now no water can run backwards through this line back, or no water can run down and no air can enter back into this line. Okay, so I'll take this out. I'll top up the reservoir one more time. once I have this all filled back up again, we'll start that process and we'll do the upper line. And I'm very certain that if I get no air out of the upper line, then I've got all the air out of the system. There's only a very tiny amount that came out of that radiator upper bleed. So we'll check and see now what we wind up with coming out of the upper one. So I'm going to go and remove that clamp, which is clamping this line right here, and we'll see if we wind up with any air coming out of the upper line. Oh yeah, we got lots of air coming out of that. Okay. I'm surprised. I did get quite a bit of air out of there. All right. Okay, so in the upper line, apparently there was still some air trapped in there. So I'm going to go ahead, pour this back in here again. And the process, this is pretty easy and probably one of the simplest ways to bleed the cooling system, and I hadn't occurred to it. And I have to give the credit to Mike Martin, because this seems like a pretty easy thing, and most people have a very low pressure compressor to be able to do this. So in just a few minutes, if you're having some difficulty with your cooling system with temperatures fluctuating wildly, which is what I was having, this allows you to be able to correct that. Okay. Now what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to purge some coolant out, and I'm going to be ready to squeeze off this line so that I don't have any of the air run backwards into the engine. Nice easy pressure. You can see it's coming out nicely. You know what? I'm going to do that one more time. I just have a feeling that there's something that's not quite right with this. I'm going to do that one more time and just make darn sure that I got no air in there, and then I'll call it a day. Fire up the car and make sure I've got a good solid temperature. Put that back in there. Okay, put the radiator cap back on. Have it seal. Put this back in here. Okay, this time I will for sure get ready to clamp that line. Okay, so it's right there. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and lightly pressure. I've got the PSI down to 10 PSI. It's very low. Yeah, see, that's looking very good. Okay, so now I have all of the air taken out of the system. So now I'll whoop! So apparently you should secure the water bottle so it doesn't slip down inside your fender. Thankfully not a drop spilled, it literally slid straight down, but you might want to have an extra pair of hands hanging onto the water bottle so that it doesn't run away on you. Alright, here we go. We've got the system bled. I'm going to go ahead and plug the last line right back on. I just have to remove these clamps. All three of these clamps, so the line's all opened up again. And so, with that said, I will do up this clamp here, and then I'll fire up the engine and make sure that I've got everything secured. It is interesting to note, though, that in the process of doing this cycling, I lost about 1/4 of an inch of height in the radiator reservoir. I'll set the car back down on the ground and make sure it's not just because the car was up. But yeah, it literally, I think it took another pint of coolant to top this all up. So I'll have to add a little coolant to make sure this is completely full before I fire up the car. But there we go, we've got it all bled, and I'll come back once I fire up the car and see if we can get the temperature working correctly. Thank you. Okay, after doing up the single connection that you disconnected, which is the upper orifice that enters the coolant tank at the top here, and you've unclamped this line that's just basically a breather line for the coolant reservoir. Once you've got this hose clamp put back on, you just need to fire it up, make sure that you've got no leaks, and you shouldn't. This should be completely sealed. It's already all full of coolant. The only air that might be in there is this little strip right here. As the engine warms up, this little strip of hose that's right here will have the air pushed into the tank, and it'll all have all of the air going into the system. I only took about a pint out, but I think it's going to be very good. So, next step is to take it out for a drive and make sure that we get the temperature up to its operating temperature and make sure that it's stable. And from there, I should be good and able to continue driving it. Now, the one thing I have left is I currently have a 190 thermostat in the car, and I may want to move to a 180 thermostat in the car just to have it run a little cooler. I'm only in hot climates like the Palm Desert and Southern California, so there's no reason for me to have a 190 thermostat. I really don't need a heater that's going to work in 20 or 30 below weather. So a 180 is probably going to be fine for me, but it's not something I'm going to change right now. I'll come back briefly and let you know whether it looks like it worked. And if it did, I would highly recommend this process for bleeding the coolant once you've got the car running. It's a super simple way of pushing the last remaining bit of air out of the car. So now that I've got the car, all the air taken out, I took it for a drive, got it up, cycled it through several cycles up to a maximum of 205 degrees. It dropped down to a low of 194 degrees after it got hot. And it would cycle in that 9-degree range, mostly floating at 199 to 204. And that seems to be where it happens to like the temperature now. So, if you have a situation where you have a fluctuating temperature where it's swinging wildly like 20 degrees, or if the vehicle is running super, super hot, it's quite likely you've got a little air pocket in your cooling system, and given how easy it is to take that out just by disconnecting this one hose and recycling the coolant that's already in the system by pressurizing some out into a bottle, repouring it back in, and working through the air that way, you wind up with a system that works very well. So, if that video was useful for you, please like and share and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next Tim's Garage.